Hello, and welcome to the 2018 Education Showdown. Today we will be highlighting several key races that will shape the future of Arizona. I'm Ted Maxwell, President and CEO of the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, one of 12 organizations sponsoring this event. Over the past year, it has become clear Arizonans are concerned about our public education system, and there's a desire to find a long-term, sustainable, and comprehensive solution to support the statewide P20 education pipeline. Today's program will focus on several key state Senate races, as well as the race for Superintendent of Public Instruction. The questions and issues being posed to these candidates should be asked by the voters of Arizona to all candidates for state office. The opportunity for the next generation of Arizonans to achieve and excel will be a result of education and training they receive. We thank you for being with us today and taking the time to become an informed voter. And please, don't forget, either vote by mail or at the polls on November 6th.
Welcome to the Education Showdown. My name is Hank Stephenson. I'm a reporter for the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson. I cover education issues, and before that I covered state politics. We're here with the candidates for Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, a statewide elected position held for a 4-year term. The superintendent's main job is administrative. It's to direct the Arizona Department of Education, but the superintendent also holds a voting position on the Arizona Board of Regents, the Arizona Board of Education, and the board that regulates charter schools. So while the superintendent doesn't actually set policy, they do command a lot of influence in the political and education spheres. And I'm pleased to present you with your next two options to be the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Kathy Hoffman is an educator, a speech therapist who up until recently worked in the classrooms of the Peoria Unified School District. This is her first campaign for public office, and she defeated a longtime Democratic politician in her party's primary. Frank Riggs is a former member of Congress from California and a CEO of an educational nonprofit that worked with charter schools. He ran unsuccessfully for a Republican primary for governor 4 years ago, and he unseated current Superintendent of Public Instruction Diane Douglas in the August GOP primary. Thank you both for being here, and let's just jump right into it.
Thank you.
Okay. So, yes or no question, Arizona's public education system underfunded?
Well, I want to qualify it. It is underfunded because of the Great Recession,
okay.
Which had a tremendous impact on revenues to state government over a 10-year period, while we were adding more than 500,000 new residents in the state, which resulted in a 70,000 student enrollment increase in our K-12 schools. But we're making good strides between Prop 123, the increased distributions from the State Land Trust Fund, the recent extension of Prop 301, the 0.6 cent sales tax, and probably most importantly, the 10% increase in per pupil funding for the current school year, which was the first phase of the governor's 20 by 20 proposal.
So back to the yes or no. Is it underfunded? We're
catching up still. I don't think there's any question about that, because again, per pupil funding, K-12 education funding in our state was largely stagnant for a decade because of the Great Recession, yet we were adding population, students in our schools. That led to two things: lower per pupil funding and larger class sizes.
And Kathy, same question to you. Are our schools underfunded?
Yes, it's definite yes. Our schools are severely underfunded. I have worked my entire professional career in Arizona's public schools. It's one of my motivators for running for this office, is to make sure that our classrooms have the resources for all of our children to be successful. I have worked in special education, and I've worked with students with disabilities who rely on comprehensive special education services to have access to a high-quality public school education, as well as students who are in the general education classrooms. We have students who are gifted, who need a highly trained, highly qualified teacher to provide a separate specialized curriculum that is directly for gifted students. And right now, because of the cuts to education, we have only 65% of our students have music and art. Our schools have seen cuts after cuts since the recession over the past decade, and it's time to turn that around and find a sustainable source of funding for our public schools.
So what is that sustainable source, and how much should it be?
Well, I look forward to working with the legislature and the governor to identify the best sustainable source of funding. I did support the Invest in Ed as the best option on the table, but I am open to meeting with business leaders, education leaders, bringing everyone to the table, because I think it's important to have buy-in from all of the leaders in the community so that we can find some agreement of what the best step is moving forward.
Hank, the best evidence that our K-12 education system is underfunded is our acute and well-documented teacher shortage. I don't think anybody can dispute that. So what I've proposed is, look, rather than just always talk about more money, let's identify the scope of the problem. Let's do a true needs assessment, if you will. And what I've proposed is that we benchmark educators' compensation, their pay and their benefits, against neighboring states in the Southwest and Mountain West regions. Give us a target that we can strive for, because it's clear we're competing with those states if we want to recruit and retain the best teacher for Arizona students. And not only do we have a challenge in recruiting teachers, but in retaining them as well when the average teacher tenure is less than 4 years.
So where's this new money come? First of all, would you advocate for a new dedicated revenue stream? And secondly, how much should it be and where is it coming from?
I'm going to propose a new dedicated funding stream for capital needs of district and charter schools. So they're hard and soft capital needs, their facilities, equipment, and materials.
Okay, we're going to get into capital needs eventually.
But that dedicated funding source is going to free up more money that can go directly for operations and into the classroom. But it's clear that we need to put all possible revenue sources on the table. That it's clear that we need a superintendent who, I think, I've been a CEO in the private sector, can talk directly to the private sector. I can walk my talk, so to speak. And again, I think we want to explore all sources, but I hasten to add that, again, we have to strive for certain goals or metrics. And in doing this, not only do we need to benchmark educator compensation, but we need to commit to at least getting to the national average, which is 60 cents of every K-12 dollar actually making its way into the classroom.
Okay.
I want to point out that teachers are tired of people with minimal classroom experience making the policies. It's one thing to write the policy, it's another thing to live the policy. And so while I've seen firsthand my colleagues leaving the state, even one of my best friends just moved to China because he's an amazing teacher, but because he didn't have adequate competitive teacher pay here in Arizona, he moved out of the country. And so I've seen it firsthand. As a speech therapist, it's been my role in the schools to bring people from all backgrounds to the table. I've worked with teachers, administrators, advocates, and I am confident in my ability to meet with the business community. I have already started meeting with them to make sure that they are ready for that transition when I am elected. And we need to have the business people ready. We need to have our educational leaders ready. And there's going to be major changes in the Department of Education so that we can turn this around.
I have the highest regard and respect for the education profession. As a certified substitute teacher, every time I do teach, my respect for classroom teachers increases. But the job of superintendent of public instruction isn't about teaching. It's not about designing curriculum. Your lead-in said it's about administration. No, it's not. It's about providing the high-level executive leadership of the Arizona Department of Education, its 700-plus dedicated employees, in the core mission, which is to implement and administer all state and federal policies and programs for K-12 education and the $10 billion in local, state, and federal funding that we spend on K-12 education annually. And then the other part of the job is to be the chief advocate for parents, students, educators, the business community, taxpayers alike. As a former member of Congress with a real proven record of legislative accomplishments, I have the broad skill set, the strengths, if you will, to be a truly effective and successful superintendent of public instruction.
Okay, we're moving on to vouchers. So both of you have said that you will vote no on Proposition 305, which would expand our educational empowerment scholarships to allow all students to take advantage of it, essentially using tax dollars to pay for vouchers to send students to private schools. My question is, should we have those vouchers at all? And under what circumstances should they be allowed? And let's start with you, Kathy.
So my plan is, well, my belief on this is that we should leave the voucher system as is for the time being. But philosophically, I have an issue with vouchers because so the issue with vouchers is that they are taking funds out of our schools to only fund private school tuitions. They cannot be used for charter schools. They are only meant for private school tuitions. And what we need to do is get serious about fully funding our public schools. And right now, for our low-income families, public schools are the best choice for our kids. We want to have community schools in the neighborhood where children can walk to school, where they have public transportation to get to school, where they have free and reduced lunch, where families have easy access if they want to go into the teacher conferences to meet with parents. And so by saying that the solution to our school funding issue is vouchers doesn't make sense to me, because families' best choice is to make sure that the local community public school is fully funded with all the teachers and support staff to make sure that the children are successful. And by saying that instead of fully funding public schools, we're going to find ways to send those kids off to private schools, doesn't make sense to me.
So then would you advocate for getting rid of our empowerment scholarship account laws altogether?
I think that could be a goal for the future. I don't think it's realistic or practical to eliminate it at this time, because right now it is serving students, mostly students with disabilities. And so that would be a long-term goal, to make sure that children have the access to a high-quality public school in their neighborhood in the future.
Okay, and same to you, Frank.
I'm surprised.
Under what circumstances?
I'm very surprised to hear that, because this is the first time Ms. Hoffman has said that if she had her way, she'd do away with education scholarship accounts or savings accounts altogether. First of all, I just want to stipulate that I don't believe that any individual or organization has the right to declare themselves the education decider or gatekeeper for parents. The parents are the highest authority. We have codified in Arizona law, through, as you know, Hank, through our Parental Bill of Rights statute, that parents have a fundamental legal right to choose and direct their child's education. That said, I am opposed to universal vouchers, or ESAs. I think it would dismantle the K-12 education system. Our district schools are the backbone of our K-12 education system. And what would we do? I mean, that's with all that existing infrastructure. So that said, the reason I oppose the expansion of ESAs is because I said they should be means tested, to give low-income families priority and parity, because low-income families historically have fewer options, fewer choices in their neighborhoods and communities. Historically, they're less mobile than more affluent families. And secondly, I wanted to increase the dollar amount so it would go further towards defraying private school tuition. And I've also heard a concern from many parents, believe it or not, who have chosen a private school education for their child, in many cases a sectarian or religious education for their child, about this testing and accountability provision that would require any private school enrolling 50 or more ESA-funded students to give a nationally normed test to all students and then report the aggregate results. Those parents are concerned that could be the camel's nose under the tent. It could lead to governmental intrusion and regulation, that is to say, by the Arizona Department of Education, of private school education in our state.
So for you, the test should be a means-based test, basically based on income.
And we do that in K-12 education with a lot of programs. We basically use the federal guidelines that qualify households or qualify families for the federal free or reduced price lunch program.
And Kathy, I want to follow up on something Frank said. The idea that schools that accept vouchers will have to be required to report the same type of information that other schools are, public and charter schools, district and charter schools are required, graduation rates, test scores, that kind of thing. If they're accepting public dollars, should they be required to report that information?
Yes, it actually goes back to the other issue with vouchers, that I don't believe that public dollars should be used for private institutions. I believe if we want to make sure we have full transparency and accountability of our tax dollars and make sure that we're protecting them, they should be going into public institutions. With the vouchers, as the program stands right now, the voucher money is given to parents on a debit card, and there has been very little oversight and tracking of these dollars. We've seen that in actually the reporting from our local newspapers, and that's another serious issue that we have, and there needs to be oversight of exactly where those dollars are going to make sure that they're actually going to education.
Okay.
But do you support them, though, for special needs children or children that have been diagnosed with learning disabilities, foster children?
Fair enough.
The dependent children of active duty military, which is what the current program allows?
as I've said, the current program, I think, should continue to stand. I do not support opening it up and expanding the program because we need to be investing all of our public dollars into public schools. And that goes back to the means testing, which I think just makes it more confusing for families because private schools are not required to provide special education services. They don't necessarily provide any transportation, free and reduced lunches. So to say that just because it's mean tested doesn't actually mean that the school that they're being sent to for a private school education is actually going to be providing all of the services to make it accessible, to even make it a choice for families.
But the parents
I
take
want to
that
move on
into
to charter
consideration.
schools.
So,
So there's been a lot of talk about charter reform recently. Even the Republican Attorney General has chimed in saying we need to kind of tighten some of these laws. I know both of you have spoken about kind of cleaning up those laws, but I want to hear exactly what you propose. I want you to tell the people exactly what you would propose on charter school reform.
Sure. Well, first of all, let's stipulate that many, if not most, Arizona charter schools are doing good work. Some of them are the highest performing schools in our state and country. And let's further stipulate that the parents of 188,000 K-12 charter school students have chosen a charter school, their particular educational model, as the best, most appropriate education for their child. That said, there are the bad actors. And they're the ones that have caused concern, created sensational headlines, and potentially could give the entire charter school sector a black eye.
So what do you do about them?
So what do you do about it? In fact, I met yesterday morning Kathy Sensman, who is the current president of State Board for Charter Schools, and suggested that the State Board develop a new policy, a new rule, if you will, that requires any charter school, as a condition of getting an initial charter or getting a charter expansion, to have a majority of disinterested parties, that is to say independent governing board members, who've had formal training in nonprofit and charter school governance, who understand their legal and fiduciary responsibilities, especially their duty to carefully examine any kind of related party transactions to guard against the appearance, if not the reality, of self-dealing.
Well, you said to investigate related party transaction. Would you want to ban that outright? And this is the practice of essentially a charter school operator also owning the buildings or owning the management service that provides the teachers and kind of making quite a bit of money in some cases off of those
If there are a majority of independent members on that charter holding governing board who have no relationship, no business or family relationship with the charter school founder, operator, I trust them to make that decision, just like I trust the governing board members of the school district
to make that decision.
I don't think you can ever outlaw or prohibit sole source bidding, but I think as a good business and fiscally responsible practice that both district and charter schools, wherever possible, should be competitive bidding.
And Kathy, same thing to you. What kind of reforms would you like to see in the charter system?
Well, a couple specifically is I do believe that charter schools should be held to the same level of accountability and transparencies as our public schools, since they are also receiving our tax dollars. And so some specific policies that I would like to see implemented include procurement policies as well as conflict of interest policies. And this past year, the legislature actually refused they refused to bring to a vote 9 different bills that that Democrats were trying to get heard, to try to get a vote on so that we could have more accountability and transparency of our charter schools. And those were not even brought to a vote. And then we have cases, I know it is a bad actor that unfortunately is giving other charter schools a bad name, but the example of Primavera, where we see a CEO receiving it was almost $9 million. I know people are saying $8 million. It's actually almost $9 million of profit when the graduation rate is around 50%. And why can those dollars should be reinvested into the educational program to make sure that should be the highest achieving school. If they have millions of dollars of extra cash on hand and the CEO is earning $9 million while the teachers are making less than average and struggling to make ends meet, then we definitely need to make sure that there are more accountability bills put into place.
Okay, and I want to move on to capital funding. This is something you started with. Right now, we're funding construction, maintenance with grants, essentially, every year. You may or may not be lucky enough to get one. What you mentioned, a dedicated revenue stream. How much would this stream be, and who would be paying for it?
Well, it would be a public-private partnership. Let me back up and say that we need a superintendent who can go to the legislature and say debt is not a 4-letter word. I mean, the fact of the matter is school infrastructure has a useful life of 30 to 50 years or longer. It's going to serve generations of school children. Should be paid for by generation of taxpayers. if we can create a revolving bond financing program using partial or full faith guarantee of state government, what's called a moral obligation of state government, and attract a significant amount of low-cost private sector capital in the form of loans and bonds as the dedicated source for funding our facility and capital needs. Again, as I said earlier, that then frees up a considerable amount of operational funding, per pupil funding, that can go towards day-to-day school operations and go to classroom teaching and learning.
And Kathy, to you, what should we do about building maintenance, new construction? How should we pay for that?
Right now, we are far too reliant on bonds and overrides and the grants to pay for school maintenance, to pay for new buildings. I know a couple years ago, the Peoria School District was desperately trying to pass a bond so that they could build 2 new high schools, and that failed. And so that left students having a longer commute with oversized classrooms, with overpopulated classrooms. And so we definitely need to have a state source of funding to make sure that it's equitable across the state, because what I've seen in my travels is that when I go to, say, the Mesa School District, I have teachers telling me that they haven't even resolved the lead in the water issue. And I know they haven't even tested any of the charter schools for lead. We have buildings that don't have adequate roofs, that are leaking roofs. We have, I was talking with one administrator who said that they only had hot water in the kitchen. There was no cold water. So even just basic fundamental necessities need to be met for all of our schools across the state.
How are we going to do that?
Well, we have to go back to having that sustainable funding source. And so I look forward to working with the legislature, and I am open to meeting with business leaders. And as I said, I have already been doing that, because it needs to be a buy-in from all the communities together, or else we're just going to keep flip-flopping back and forth. And we cannot have more of these Band-Aid solutions like the bonds and overrides that disproportionately serve higher income neighborhoods.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you both for being here. Next up, we'll have the Senate candidates from Legislative District 21. That's Rick Gray, a Republican, and Kathy Connect, an independent. Welcome back. We're here with the 2 candidates for State Senate and Legislative District 21, Republican Senator Rick Gray and Independent Kathy Connect. The district covers the West Valley, including Sun City, El Mirage, and most of Peoria. Republicans have a steady voter registration advantage over Democrats, but independents there make up almost a third of all voters. Gray was first elected to the House in 2010 and served at the legislature until 2017. He was appointed to the Senate position earlier this year. Connect is a longtime Peoria School Board member, community activist, and past director of Leadership West. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's jump right in. I'll start with you, Kathy. Is Arizona's education system underfunded?
Arizona's education system is severely underfunded. Since 2009, $4.5 billion have been cut from the budget for education. And Arizona is the state that has cut more from education than any other state, and also is the slowest to return funding to education after the recession.
Okay. And Rick, same question to you. Are we underfunding?
I think everybody at the Capitol would agree that our K-12 education is underfunded, although I do have some difference of agreement with Ms. Connect's $4.5 billion. If you look at the ASBO side, Arizona Association of Board Officials, you look at that $4.5 million that they've got projected, they're going into the future with potential cuts. And I think that skews the facts. I think that misrepresents the facts. And I think if we're going to have this discussion with education, especially with funding or even title reform, we have to put the facts on the table, not projections that maybe make our side or make our case. We need to look at the facts as they are.
Well, that's a perfect segue. How much is our education system underfunded right now? And would you support a dedicated revenue stream to raise the funding?
Well, right now we have multiple streams. We've got state general fund, which right now in this last budget was about $5.9 billion. We've got a local fund local fees, which is $4.1 billion, and then we've got federal money, which is $1.4 billion. So our K-12 education right now is at over $11 billion. I do think we need to take a comprehensive look. When I was in the House of Representatives, that was one of the things I was trying to work on, is to get our caucuses together, House and Senate, to look at a comprehensive plan. Where do we want to be? Back then, it was a 2020 vision. Where do we want to be in 2020? Obviously, that's not going to work because 2020 is too close. But I think we need to look at a comprehensive plan and say, what do we need our K-12 system to look like that will be the best for our kids? And then from there, how much do we need?
And can we do that without raising taxes? And if not, would you support raising taxes?
Well, I don't want to hog the conversation, but I think one of the things that we've seen and one of the things that we've done over the last few years, we've had a huge recession that impacted us. Over the last few years, you see us coming out of that. One of the things that we've done is been feeding more money into our K-12 system, because that's always been a priority. In 2009, when our budget really went south, they even hocked the state buildings to make money up to get into the K-12 system. So again, do we need more money? Yes. How much do we need? I don't know. I know that as it is right now, what we're doing to grow our economy is working. And you can either cut the pie differently and give one sector more of the pie, or you can grow the pie. And that's what we're doing right now. Some of those tax breaks that people are upset about are actually growing our economy. We're seeing more jobs coming in. We're seeing more income tax. We're seeing more state revenues because of that income tax and sales tax and corporate tax.
Okay. Kathy, would you be willing to raise taxes or find a new sustainable source of education funding?
Well, we're still $800 million behind where we were in 2008. And that's even with the Proposition 123. So we have a long way to go. And I think the first thing we need to do to get out of a hole is to stop digging. Arizona's budget is about $10 billion. And because of the way that lobbyists have been able to do cutouts of our state budget from corporations and special interests, we give away $14 billion. If we could just shore up that tax structure and bring in some of those dollars that are being exempted, I think that we can raise more funds for public education without raising taxes.
And what kind of tax giveaways or tax loopholes would you like to close?
Oh, well, for example, there's frivolous things like if you buy a piece of art in Scottsdale, for example, you're taxed with with the sales tax if you live in Arizona, but not if you're out of state. That's just kind of silly kind of things that doesn't help us as Arizona move forward and fund education and build a quality workforce for a better economy.
If I can tag off on that, because there are always, in essence, unintended consequences, and you have to look at the whole picture economically. And this is one of the big debates of, if we just tax. It was John F. Kennedy who had said we need to reduce our taxes to raise our revenue. One of the most popular Democrat presidents in history. Interestingly, Ronald Reagan said the same thing. That's one of the things we've been doing in Arizona, and we've seen it pay. So let's take the example of the art situation in Scottsdale. The reality is, and it was just like Barrett Jackson, if we start taxing those cars or that artwork, those dealers will go someplace else. And so then we lose all of that business. So that's one of the challenges at the legislature is, you can have good ideas, but it comes with unintended consequences. So we always have to be looking for what are those unintended consequences.
So would you be willing to repeal that specific tax break?
Well, one of the things I do believe, because I have pushed for a comprehensive K-12 education reform, let's look at this and bring all sides together so that...
But what about Rick Gray?
But let me finish. So I've done that with education. I have the same view toward taxes. We need to look at that comprehensively. Let's look at our entire tax package, including the credits. Are those, as a business owner, I spent money, thousands of dollars a month on advertising because that brought money in. The money that we're giving to the Office of Tourism is bringing in multiple times what we're giving. So we need to, again, as we evaluate our whole tax structure, start looking at these credits. Are these credits actually bringing more in, or are they not? And so, yeah, if if you could tax something and not have it leave, in essence, causing a loss, then those tax credits and that tax system would be something that worth looking at.
But we do give away a lot of tax credits, and so far the legislature hasn't put the mechanisms in place to evaluate whether or not there is a return on investment. You can't cut your way into a successful business, and you can't do the same thing in education as well. And we've cut back in Arizona on the investments that we need to be successful moving forward. We've cut funding for full-day kindergarten, and the legislature over the last 10 years has failed to put that back in place, even though we know that early childhood education has the highest return on investment in anything we can do for the academic achievement of our kids.
Okay, we need to move on to Proposition 305.
If I can just make one
Quickly.
point, because it does go back to that statement of cutting, and in essence, we're cutting taxes, and so we're underfunded. We have done some things to encourage businesses. And it has been impactful. If you look at the JLBC's last month's report, our income tax is up because more people are working. You look day after day after day, there are more and more companies moving to Arizona, one, because of our regulatory environment, and two, because of our tax structure, and they are bringing jobs. And so we are, in essence, growing the pie. So we can, again, look at it two ways. We can either tax people more and then reduce the pie, or what we're doing numerically shows that it's successful.
Proposition 305. I want to know where both of you stand on this issue. And let's just start with that. Do you support the Proposition 305? Will you be voting no to strike down the legislature's bill to expand vouchers, empowerment scholarship accounts to make them make all students in Arizona eligible, or will you be voting yes to uphold that law?
Okay, that is a very challenging question. One, when you say all students, there's a cap.
But all students would be eligible.
All students would be eligible, but the maximum number you would have would be, in fact, it's less now because the time has passed, less than 30,000 kids.
As long as that cap stays in place.
Yeah. You know, I support empowering parents, but my challenge is I don't like putting something like that in the Constitution that cannot be changed. Over and over again, we have legislation, and we have to tweak that. When you put it in the statutes or in the Constitution, there is no tweaking. You have to have a two-thirds vote, and it's so. To be honest with you, I've been wrestling with that, and as it stands right now, I'm a no.
And Kathy, how about you?
I'm a definite no. I helped Save Our Schools Arizona to gather signatures. I believe that the taxpayers deserve to know that the money that they put in as public funds go to public schools where all students are welcome to take advantage of that education, and there's higher levels of accountability and transparency for their taxpayer dollars.
And speaking of accountability and transparency, I want to talk about charter schools. There's been a lot of talk lately, thanks to some great investigative reporting from the Arizona Republic, about possibly flaws in our charter system. Transparency, accountability, what would you do to bring that to our charter system?
Well, I think in a free market economy, the government needs to be out of the business of picking in winners and losers. And right now, charter schools and private schools and public schools are not held to the same rules of operation, and I don't think that's right. And certainly when we see CFOs or CEOs of charter schools walking away with an $8 million salary, or we see legislators being able to influence votes for student tuition organizations that puts money in their own pockets, or in our own neighborhood when a school district can't say, I want to put a quality school on this corner, and the government says, well, no, you can't do that because there are a dozen A and B rated schools within 3 miles of that lot. A charter school can come in, they can build whatever they want. What they did build in my neighborhood was an extravagant building, and by the way, if that charter owner decides to sell that building, he puts the money in his own pocket and it does not go back to taxpayers. That's not fair, that's not equitable, and I don't think that is a reasonable way to be spending taxpayers' dollars.
And Rick, do you think that the charter system needs reform? And if so, what would you advocate for?
Well, it's interesting because I was asked to chair a stakeholder committee on this issue that came before us because of the last budget of low-cost procurement, low-cost bids in construction with schools. And I had actually talked with some people from the Attorney General's office before Mark Brnovich came out with his statement. And we were talking about that. I do think it needs to be evaluated. Again, part of that comprehensive plan, what's fair and what's reasonable. I do think we have to take a deep dive. I also think we have to look at the conflict of interest rules in the legislature. I'm open to that because we do have accountability, and we should have transparency and accountability, whether it's charter or public schools.
So what kind of changes would you actually advocate for?
Well, that's, we need to get all the facts. One of the challenges is people jump, especially when they have a political agenda and they can use something to beat their drum. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to get all the facts. Let's look at what's fair and what's right. If somebody puts in as a private business owner, you buy a building, if you spend $10 million on that and it's over a 20-year period and it does increase, do you not have a right to sell that building? We need to be a little more thorough on all the information, do what's fair and what's right, but not use that as a fear tactic and fear mongering. And I see that too often in politics. We throw things out there and we get people all fired up emotionally and we get them fearful and I'll give you an example. ESAs. We have minuscule amounts of ESAs. And yet the benefits that they're having, I was just at a school yesterday, Gateway. Here is a school strictly with kids that have Asperger's. It's a private school. It was started by a mom whose child has Asperger's. And problem after problem in public schools, she started that. They've got 97 kids. They're doing a fantastic job. Now they've got their parents going, okay, are we going to lose out?
Kathy, you want to respond to that at all? Or we can move on.
We can move on.
Well, I just want to say, just so our viewers understand, if we had a numbers that were going to just completely devastate our district schools, then that would be something to look at.
Okay.
But when you're talking 0.25% of our students.
Kathy, would you like to respond?
I would like to respond to that. The actions of the legislature over the last 10 years have caused major harm to our public schools. On the school board, we have had to make very difficult decisions and cut programs that benefited students and that families like, because the budget has been cut year after year after year. We've done our very best and I think have offered incredible choices to students in all of our schools. And if competition was going to be the magic bullet that was going to rise all boats, wouldn't we be doing better by now? So
are you saying you didn't have an increase in our budget this year?
We did.
Did we not have an increase last year?
We did, and partially because of the local taxpayers went out and supported an override for us. And you know what? If the state government would fund education more fully, we wouldn't have to continually shift that tax burden from the state, which is his constitutional obligation, back onto local taxpayers.
And that's a great segue into what I wanted to address next, which is school construction, maintenance, upkeep. Right now, we're funding it through local bonds and overrides. We're funding it through grants. Should we have a statewide dedicated revenue stream for construction, for maintenance, for upkeep?
Well, I don't want to be the first one all the time, but I'm more than willing to do that. I do think we need to evaluate that. I mean, the system we had before was basically a silo where you had to spend money here, you had to spend money there. In that kind of a situation, if you've got a school that's growing like Vail and their growth triggers a new school, they would have to build a new school, even if what they wanted to do was buy a local building from another school district that they could get their kids in sooner and get more kids. That wouldn't have been allowed.
So you said you wanted to look at a new revenue stream. How much should it be and where should it come from?
That's where we need to have our education experts. And then one of the challenging things that I've had, when I first ran for office, I met with we had Peoria school district was the only one. Now we've got Peoria and Dysart. I met with the current or the then superintendent, Denton Santorelli, and talked with him about that. And I told him, if you've got any ideas, whether it's K-12, Title 15, because he said we need to reduce that, I said, let me know.
Okay. Kathy, Should we have a dedicated revenue stream to pay for building construction, maintenance? And if so, where should it come from? Who should be paying this? How much should it be?
So building construction and maintenance is another area of the Arizona Constitution that our legislature has failed to uphold. Because of the way the system is, those school districts that have a very sophisticated and large staff, somebody who can focus their attention on writing for those grants, has a better opportunity to get those. Smaller, more rural districts have more difficulty doing that. And we set up a system of inequity, again, where some communities have the capacity to pass bonds and overrides, bonds in particular when we're talking about capital expenses, and some communities can't. So even though we have an equalization formula in the state of Arizona, we end up with communities that actually have the greatest need, unable to support quality schools, equitable schools that provide kids across the state with an equal opportunity to achieve the American dream.
Okay, and we've got less than 1 minute left. I want to point out that 41% of our students are passing the AZ merit test, and ask you in 10 seconds or less, what should that percentage be and what will you do to get it up?
Well, 10 seconds or less is hard to do. One of the things I want to say is we've got great schools. I was just at one this morning. We get so negative and we focus on some of our schools that are more challenging, which we've got some of those, but we've also got a lot of great schools that are doing great work.
How do we get those test scores up?
Well, we need to, again, come together and say, as communication or as education experts.
Kathy, how do we get those up?
We invest in early childhood education and we invest in our teachers.
Thank you both so much for being here. And next up, we'll have the candidates from Legislative District 17. Welcome back. I'm joined by the two candidates for the State Senate in Legislative District 17, Republican Representative J.D. Mesnard and Democrat Steve Wickert. The district covers Sun Lakes, most of Chandler, and some of Gilbert. Republicans have a roughly 10 percentage point voter registration advantage, and the district has been traditionally Republican. But Democrats are putting the district on their map this year, attempting to flip the Senate from red to blue. Mesnard is the current Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, and after 8 years in the lower chamber is attempting to move up to the Senate. Wickert is a former healthcare administrator who ran unsuccessfully for the same office 2 years ago. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's just jump right in. JD, is Arizona's education system underfunded?
I think it has been underfunded. There's no doubt that the Great Recession took a toll on our state and every state, and we had to freeze some places in the education formula and scale some others back. But we this year invested $1 billion in ongoing new money. It will actually put us beyond the high water mark we were at in the past in 2008. So it's a huge step forward. I'm sure there's more work to be done, but a 20% teacher pay raise, restoring the formula for school supplies, building new schools, especially in Chandler, which has been growing very quickly. It was a great session.
And Steve, do you agree? Was it a great session and are schools properly funded?
I don't believe schools are properly funded at the moment. And don't take my word for that. Take the 55,000 plus people that marched on the Capitol to finally have the Capitol and the legislature listen to them. I do believe we need to add some funding back. We're still not at 2008 levels, as far as I understand, and we need to bring that up.
How much funding and how would you pay for it?
Funding-wise, well, we're basically, I would say we're $800 million in the hole. So as far as funding it, I think we need to stop the current tax cuts that we have been basically doing on an annual basis for the past 27 out of the past 28 years. So we're going to need to stop the cuts. I also think that we, well, let's start with that.
Stop the cuts and let us grow our way out of this problem, or would you advocate for raising some sort of dedicated revenue stream?
Well, we definitely need a dedicated revenue stream. I do believe that the Invest in Ed Act was on the right track. And, you know, we had 277,000 people that signed that bill to move in that direction. So I would be in favor of addressing some kind of tax reform, maybe to make it a little less regressive than it currently is right now.
And JD, should we be finding new revenue streams? I assume, raising taxes in one way or another to fund our education system.
So the good news is raising taxes is not the only type of additional revenue that we can pursue. What we're seeing right now, because of our booming economy, and not just because nationally things are booming, but Arizona is doing really well because of the tax policies that we put in place. And if we rolled those back, that would send a really bad signal. In fact, there were folks who kind of hit pause when they saw this Invest in Ed measure going through because it was going to increase some taxes by 98%, which would be bad for our economy. But we have other revenue options. People are talking about renegotiating the gaming compacts. That could be a lot of money. The Supreme Court case with fantasy sports and sports betting and all of that, that's going to be a robust conversation, but you're seeing other states look to that for revenue streams. We'll have that discussion here, but none of that involves taking more from our taxpayers in the form of a tax increase. So I'd much rather pursue those before we're asking our taxpayers to pay more.
Let's move on to vouchers. Proposition 305 will be on the ballot this year. That would seek to expand our current voucher system to allow basically any child in Arizona to obtain a empowerment scholarship account using taxpayer dollars to pay for private and parochial schools. You voted for the bill that the referendum is based on.
Yeah.
How are you going to vote on the referendum?
That's a really good question, so I'm conflicted on that. I support the policy, and I just want to clarify that it didn't expand it to every student. It expanded eligibility,
yes.
but it kept a cap on it of about 3% of the total student population, so pretty small. And it was just another way to provide options for parents. And I do think that parents know what's best for their child. I don't think any politician or bureaucrat is going to care more about a child's education than the child's parent. So the problem with it going to the ballot is that anything that passes at the ballot is voter protected. And as much as I would support the policy, I generally don't like to lock things in stone, and so I'm conflicted, and I'll just have to decide. I know a number of my colleagues are feeling the same way between now and November.
What about you, Steve?
I'm a hard no on 305. I really do feel that we have plenty of choice right now. We have parents within our school district that are actually taking advantage of what has been set up by school choice in our state. So I really do feel that we shouldn't be playing to advance vouchers in our state. I think we need to essentially keep everything the way it is right now. We don't need any that kind of change.
But you're also not advocating for rolling back or eliminating our voucher system.
No, well, the current empowerment scholarship account program that we have right now, I think it's a good one. The intent was really good to basically open it up to kids with disabilities, and I think that's great, but I just feel like we need to stop that there and eliminate the need for using public dollars to pay for private schools.
So I'm glad that you're supportive now, because when we first introduced the program, when I was first coming into the House, it was a big fight with your side of the aisle. They would not, even for students in foster care and disabilities. And now it seems like they've seen that it works and it is providing those options. And we're having the same fight. Now it's expanding eligibility. I think it parallels it. And if it does move forward, I think that maybe in a few years, perhaps you'll be a bigger fan of this expanded model now, just as you are with the narrow one.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I really do feel that public funds need to pay for public institutions. So, that being said, I do agree that was a good and well-intended program. I still think it needs a lot more oversight, even at that small cap that it's at right now. So when we're talking about expanding it to 30,000 kids as opposed to roughly 15 that it is now. And I don't know if you'd agree, but there has been some accountability problems within that small program.
Yeah, so and in fact, there's always going to be accountability challenges in any program, including in district schools and charter schools, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in this program. But it has a pretty high success rate. And I think we need to make sure we remember that parents pay into the tax system, and all that we're really doing is empowering them. That's what we call it, empowerment scholarship accounts, to make the right decision for their kid and acknowledge that they are already paying into the tax code. To force them to go and come up with the money on their own when they're already paying into the system seems a little bit unfair. And so all we're doing is offering them some, not all, but some assistance to cover those tuition and related costs.
I want to ask, as long as these private and parochial schools are accepting vouchers, essentially taxpayer money, public money, should they be held to the same standards as our normal, public schools, district and charter schools? Meaning, should they have to report the same type of testing information, outcome data as a regular school has to?
Yeah, and so in the bill, the referendum that's on the ballot, Prop 305, there is some of that. There is some reporting. There is, it tries to strike a right balance. So if you just have a single student that comes in with an ESA, are you really going to make the school sort of redefine how they operate entirely? Probably not. But if you have a whole bunch of students coming into a school using ESAs, then it kind of ramps up the reasonableness of, well, we should maybe sort of see what's coming from that. And that's what this bill did.
And Steve, what do you think about that idea? As long as they're taking taxpayer money, should they be held to the same standard as a traditional school, or should there be kind of a litmus test of, if you're taking this much public money, then you have to start reporting?
I don't believe there should be a threshold. I think that as long as any taxpayer dollar is going to any institution, there should be some kind of accountability there, and I believe they should be held to the same standards as any public institution would.
Well, talking accountability, let's move on to charter schools. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of reporting lately about maybe what you could call flaws in our charter system. I want to hear what you would change about our charter system in order to ensure that the taxpayers are getting what they're paying for.
Right. So I truly believe that no person should become rich basically off of the backs of our students and at taxpayer expense. Right now, I don't believe we have the accountability and transparency measures in place. Essentially, we have wealthy individuals that are essentially making money off of our kids. So as far as procurement laws are concerned, and I know the Democrats stood up in the last budget debate, they were standing up for capped classroom sizes, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. But they were standing up for some democratic ideals there, and I know, Speaker Mesnard, you actually supported a relaxing of the procurement laws around charter schools and accountability.
Yeah, so that actually is a gross misunderstanding of what happened, and that sometimes happens when you're not familiar with the bill to law process. So we did nothing to relax things. In fact, there was in the bill additional regulations on charter schools. For instance, the charter board before my bill could not go after a charter school for financial mismanagement. They could for academic or operational, but not financial. We saw an issue that happened over on the West Side, Discovery something charter school, and so this gave new authority to the charter board to come in and crack down. The procurement piece, because we don't build charter schools, that's only done for district schools, didn't apply. There was a whole other section of law that applied for charter schools, and so it was going to create a conflict. So we pulled it out, but it was pulling out new language. It wasn't pulling out anything in existing law. So some people mistakenly believed that we were relaxing things, and I can understand why they might think that, but we didn't, and I wouldn't be in favor of it. And in fact, I would be open to more conversations about what sort of oversight the state has with any contract situation, whether you're talking with charter schools or, when someone's building roads or providing a health care service. All of that is an example of the state contracting, and we need to figure out what sort of oversight would apply in any of those situations.
So to the heart of that point, I think, is, we've seen issues where Primavera Online High School, the CEO was making $9 million a year while producing poor outcomes for his students. I think what Steve was saying is we should pull the profit motive out of education. Do you agree with that sentiment?
So here's what I think would be a challenge with that idea. on the surface, it sounds, oh yeah, we shouldn't be making money. But when the construction company comes in and builds a school, they make money. When you sell books to schools, textbooks that are pretty expensive, guess what? A textbook company made money. When you sell buses to schools, they make money. When you rent a facility, somebody is making money. So the question is
but the
whether or not
superintendent of a public school district will never make money in the same way that the operator of a charter school might be able to.
Sure, and their superintendents are making quite a bit of money, I suppose.
It's not bad pay, but it's not the
very
same.
high salary. No, but what we're talking about is sort of mixing. So you have the salary side of things, and a charter school is going to have somewhat similar salaries to staff at a district school. But what we're seeing with some of these examples that are being talked about is equity that builds up in a property. And so when a charter school, for instance, has to find a facility because the state's not providing it like it does for a district school, it's on them. They can go and rent the property from a landlord, and that landlord will make money. But then that landlord could kick them out of the facility if they find a better tenant. Or the operator might say, you know what, I'm going to put the collateral and take the risk and create some equity here. And why is that different, I guess, is the question we have to answer.
Well, and I guess what I'm curious about is, should charter operators have to keep an arm's distance from the people that they're contracting with? Like, essentially, a superintendent of a school district could never give a contract to provide all the subs in a school district to his brother.
Right, but a private contractor in any other service, we don't say, hey, you can't hire your brother. So that's why I say I am perfectly open to a conversation about the state contracting for any service or good, whether it's charter schools, construction, healthcare. But I guess my point is that it has to be that broad-based conversation because the principles are still the same. I think that people have a harder time because there's a lot of misunderstanding, frankly, at the difference between district schools and charter schools. And many legislators don't understand the difference. And so there's going to be a lot of learning and I think a lot of conversation. I'm happy to be part of those conversations.
Steve, anything you want to add to that point?
Yeah, I feel like any check that goes from a public entity to a private entity should have some oversight. Because right now, the Attorney General, after basically a check is given to a charter school, that money is out of the purview of the Attorney General as far as from an audit perspective. So I feel that the same rules, again, should apply from the public setting as opposed to the private setting. And I think we need to be working towards that.
So when you said Attorney General, did you mean Auditor General?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
But Auditor General.
The Auditor General does, and you can look at the Auditor General's website, they do audit charter schools. And in the past, they've audited for different things, but now, based on the bill that I put forward, they can audit based on financial and other considerations. So in fact, again, we did expand transparency and accountability, and we really got to stay focused on what we all want. We want good outcomes. Mm-hmm. And I think that as long as a charter school is performing, we need to celebrate that, and we need to maybe spread that. If they're not performing, I definitely see a greater oversight role because, what are they doing? But as long as they're living up to the standards we put in place, I think they should be free to manage their operations.
And Steve, I want to turn to capital funding for schools. Mm-hmm. Right now we're funding new buildings, maintenance, largely from local bonds or from grants from the state level. Should we have a dedicated revenue source for buildings construction, building renewal, building maintenance? And if so, where does that money come from?
Yeah, I do believe we need a dedicated structure mechanism where essentially we're not going to the local taxpayers for the money that we need for maintenance and repairs. Right now, the way it looks like is that, the localities that are more affluent and can afford the, bond measures, they're able to do that, whereas there's a lot of other localities that don't have that luxury. So I really do feel that we do need to have a mechanism at the state level where we can make sure that all kids are learning in a safe, secure environment, not dependent on which district they live in.
And what should that mechanism look like?
I think it should be a part from the state oversight on that, and so there should be dedicated funding that would be going directly to the districts that need it, that need the maintenance and repair options or new builds. Those need to be paid for.
And how much? And where specifically? I'm curious. Where does this? Are we talking a sales tax? Are we talking an income tax? Are we talking?
Well, no. I think basically we need to readjust some of what we're talking about the tax exemption, sales tax exemptions. We need to look towards those. We have 330 some odd sales tax exemptions that we haven't looked at for a long time. I also believe that we need some reform in our criminal justice system. Right now we have many nonviolent drug offenders that are sitting in our prisons. And from the studies that I've seen, anywhere from 200 to 400 million could come out of that. So I think that's some funding that we could move towards our school system.
JD, do we bring back a dedicated source of funding for building new buildings, maintaining old buildings?
Yeah, so this is left over from the 1990s, the Roosevelt v. Bishop case that went before the state Supreme Court, and we never, and by we, I wasn't around back then, but the state never came up with a real solution. Instead, they essentially turned over the keys to the general fund to the School Facilities Board, which builds schools, and just said, tell us what you need. And essentially that's what we've been doing ever since. And lately, it's actually been, the biggest need's been in Chandler. So I've been proud to stand up for making sure that schools are built in Chandler as they need to be. But we don't have any sort of real structure there. It's the one major piece of the education formula that is sort of year to year. And whether you're talking district schools or charter schools, we definitely have to address the capital issue.
And where does that money come from? Where are we going to?
Yeah, so and I think, again, it's part of that whole picture where whether you're talking economic growth, which we're seeing right now, other funding mechanisms like the gaming compact renegotiations, that sort of thing. I think that there's a lot of potential there without taking more from it.
And unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here. And thank you all for watching. Now go vote.